We're doing a video podcast today where we're bringing on a special guest, Crystal, who is both a homesteader and an attorney, and she's going to talk to us today about best practices for structuring your homestead business. Crystal, welcome to the Grass-Fed Homestead.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here today.
I'm really happy to have you here to talk about this because this is we're talking about business, homestead business today, and the reason why I was excited to talk to you about this is because I did a video touching on this kind of stuff, and obviously not giving any legal advice, but kind of telling people this is what I have done because this is right for my circumstances right now. Just just so people can see an example. And what that did was it led to a lot of questions. People started emailing me questions and this and that. And obviously, I'm not an attorney, so I can't give legal advice, but you are. So you are more qualified to talk about this stuff. So before we get into that, though, can you share with us a little bit about who you are and maybe how you're related to the homesteading community?
Yeah, so my name's Crystal McDonough, and I own McDonough Law Group. I've been an attorney for about 10 years. But first, I'm going to have to give a little disclaimer here. While I'm talking about legal things, this is for educational purposes only. Not giving legal advice in this discussion. We're just having a great discussion about things that come up, legal issues that things people should be aware of. If you do need legal advice, you could always call our firm. We've got attorneys all over the country, so no matter where you're at, we can reach you. Or if you have an attorney that you've got a relationship with, and you've got some questions that kind of are raised out of this discussion, call your attorney. So that's a little disclaimer there. Not giving legal advice, just we're having a great discussion. So I have my own homestead. I guess that's the bottom line. I have a small 6.5-acre homestead. I've got chickens, horses, alpacas, goats, and a huge garden. And I preserve a lot of our food for the year. In fact, I'm right now in the middle of tomato season. So I'm preserving lots of tomatoes and lots of sauce right now. But I have my own homestead. And what really got me involved in the community, in the homestead community, is I was just kind of isolated out here on our place. And not only just as a homesteader, but also as an attorney, I work a lot. So I don't have a lot of time to socialize. And so I really started just researching online to find, are there any homesteading communities out there where I can find like-minded people that I can share my wins, and I can share my frustrations and just meet other people and build friendships. And I found Abundance Plus and joined right away. And I met Dan there, and I've met some other great people there. And so that's how Dan and I got connected, is through Abundance Plus. And I'm excited about the Abundance Plus community. I'm actually working with the Abundance Plus community to provide an entire series of legal educational videos for the community, because I do this work as an attorney, as well as having my own homestead and doing my own things that I have to do. So I have a very different perspective, I suppose, when it comes to homesteading and the legal side of it.
And the first thing I wanted to touch on are the different legal entities
Okay.
that someone might encounter when they're looking at starting a homestead business.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this could be someone who's just interested in selling some produce at the local farmers market, or maybe they are selling feeder pigs for people to raise out. Whatever their niche is in homesteading, um, they're generating some income to a point where they want to start thinking about actually making it a business. What would that look like for someone wanting to get started? Like what are their options?
So a lot of your options are going to be pretty much standard across the board, no matter where you live, because business is business, whether it's in New York, California, Colorado, Idaho, Texas, Mississippi. It doesn't, business is business. And part of that reason is because the IRS has such a standard of taxation for our businesses. So there's there's a pretty much a general standard of how businesses run and how states look at businesses. There are differences state to state. So if you are looking at starting a business, or if you're needing specific state advice, that's where you should probably talk to an attorney in that state. But in general, there's 4 different types of entities or business structures that you can use. There's a sole proprietor, a partnership, an LLC, and a corporation. And those are the different business entity structures, not necessarily your taxation structure, but your business entity structure. And when you're looking at which one is the right one for you, you need to understand kind of in general what each one of them does, because the whole purpose of setting up a business is to protect yourself personally, you and your family, from liability. I mean, that is really the bottom line. When we talk about what's the purpose of it, it's to protect from liability. Bottom line. So you have to understand what your potential liabilities are in order to understand the right entity structure for you. So that's kind of where I start off when I'm talking to clients about what is the right fit for them. But in general, a sole proprietorship has 0 liability protection. A sole proprietorship is basically somebody putting a sign out front their gate saying eggs for sale.
Yeah.
Leave money in a jar.
And can I just interrupt for a second? And can you give an example of what that liability is, especially
Yeah.
homesteaders who are selling food-based products? Like, what would that look like?
Okay. So liabilities for homesteaders are vastly different than liabilities for other types of businesses, because you're preparing a product that is likely going to be consumed by somebody else. So when you're talking about, can somebody get sick from this product? All of a sudden, your liability goes through the roof. Because, this day that we live in, people are sue happy. If somebody gets sick, if you get rear-ended in a car, if you slip and fall in the grocery store, somebody is going to sue. And that is just the reality of the world we live in these days. So understanding what those risks are is important. If you are canning products and you're selling those products, you've got a couple of different, or any kind of food product you're selling, you've got a couple of different layers of potential liability. You have your regulatory compliance liability, meaning you have potential, depending on the size of your operation and what products you're doing, you could have a federal regulation that you have to follow. You most likely have state and local laws you have to follow. So your state, your county, your possibly the town or the county, the city that you live in. There's just a lot of different layers of regulatory liability. If you're not in compliance with the regulations, then you've got potential liabilities through those agencies that oversee those. So you could have fines. They can come in and shut down your operation. Sometimes there's criminal penalties depending on the type of regulation and the agency. There's all different kinds of things that could happen to you for not complying when you are dealing with food stuff. On the consumption side, the consumer side, you have a whole different kind of liabilities that you could be facing. If you have a food product that is contaminated or isn't safely prepared, there is liability for any kind of loss that you could, that the consumer has. So it could be sickness, loss of life. It could be, just a dangerous product. There could be liability just around selling a product that's not safe and that's dangerous. So any of those kinds of liabilities are a possibility when you are raising food to sell, selling food, selling any kind of food product, anything like that. When it comes to food, I won't ever forget this story. When I was in law school, one of my classes is called torts. Torts is just a fancy word for any kind of case, liability case where somebody's gotten hurt or sick or fallen, kind of your slip and fall, or getting sick off a product. That would be kind of a tort law. But one of the stories and one of the cases I had to read in law school was just that. Somebody had a farm stand in California and they were selling, I think it was jam, and somebody got E. coli or one of the botulism or something really bad. It might have been botulism. I don't remember the story right, but off the top of my head, but somebody got sick and died. And the entire case that we studied in that law school class was, what liability happened to those people? What happens? What does the law say about that? And what kind of liability? And that was my first introduction to food stuff liability. And it scared me because I don't sell food. Everything I raise here, we either eat it or I give it away if we can't. If I've got an abundance of produce, I give it away. But I know, and I work with a lot of people who do sell it. So making sure that you're complying and things like that is really important. But that's a real risk. And so you've got to figure out the best way to work around that. That's a long story to tell you that what the liability is.
No, that's important. You cover all that, and I probably should have led with that question too, because you started mentioning liability protection with sole proprietorship, so how it doesn't have any, and then I was like,
Right.
oh, probably should identify what a liability is. So, yeah. So if we could go back to talking about the sole proprietor, you said they don't have any liability protection.
No, a sole proprietor is basically just me selling to you. And as me, there's no business, there's no protection. You might have registered a name with your Secretary of State. So you might have, Crystal's Peaches, but there's no entity structure to protect you. If you're a sole proprietor, there's huge risk. I usually never advise people to do a sole proprietor. It is so easy to set up a company where you can have liability protection. It seems foolish to me for anyone ever to do a sole proprietor, personally. So I just wouldn't do it. But people do. People still set it up. And I have clients that come to us all the time that say, this has just happened to me. They tell me a story about, now they're facing liability. They have a sole proprietor and they don't have any protection. So what that really means is if you're sued, if you are facing liability as a sole proprietor, every single asset that you have in your name is exposed to that liability. So if your farm and ranch, if all of your property on your homestead, let's say it's worth $500,000 for all your property, and all of that is owned in your name, you don't have any protection, you just are operating as a sole proprietor, all that land is exposed to potential liability. So if you're sued and you lose and you have to, you are ordered by the court to pay damages, you may have to sell your property to pay those damages. That's a huge exposure.
Other assets might be your tractor, if you have a nice new tractor, something like that. Vehicles you may own, other properties you might own. I mean, it could be anything, right?
It could be anything. It can be your retirement account. If you've got any kind of 401k or IRA, those are exposed. If you've got a herd of cattle, that's exposed. I'm working on a deal right now specifically to help one of my clients. He owns a huge ranch. Right now, I'm working on trying to get his cattle protected from potential liability because a lot of times if you're doing, you can use assets like your cattle or your sheep, your livestock as collateral for a loan. So how you structure those loans can expose your livestock and your operation to potential liability risk. Liability doesn't have to just be a lawsuit. Liability can also be a loan. It can be debt that you owe. That's also liability. So if you've got a mortgage on your place, that's a liability. If you have a loan where you've used your livestock as the chattel or as the collateral, that's liability. So liability is all around us. So what we're always thinking about, what's always in the back of my head, everything that I do is, how do I mitigate liability? How do I minimize as much as I can? I can never guarantee there's no risk because there's risk in just getting in the car and driving down the road. But everything I do, I want to try to minimize that risk as much as possible.
Yeah. So what other option? You mentioned the other options. Take us through those other ones and what you think.
Okay. So the first one we talked about was the sole proprietor, and we talked about how that's not usually the best idea because you don't have any liability protection. You're fully exposed to liability and risk. The second option is a partnership. Partnerships are pretty much the same thing. It's just like a sole proprietor, except for there's more than one person. So a partnership is the same thing. You don't have any liability protection. It's very, very exposed, very minimal protections. So I typically don't recommend that as well. And again, it can vary state by state because every state has a different set of laws on the books about, each type of entity. So, but in general, partnerships are also exposed to liability, just like a sole proprietor.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask if so would that be a marital relationship if both parties in the marriage want to be engaged in the business, or say a neighbor or something like that? I mean, that would be a partnership.
Yes. So anytime you have more than one person, if you're operating as a sole proprietor, and you bring in a partner like your spouse or a neighbor or somebody else, it could be somebody that's got a similar business interest, you're going to combine your interest. It doesn't matter, as long as there's more than one person. A partnership can be anybody. Most of the time, in my experience, it's usually a close family friend or a spouse. Okay. Most of the time, that's what the partnerships are. But again, I don't recommend that either because very, very exposed to liability. So there's only two entity types that really do provide the type of liability protection that you want as a business. And that would be an LLC or a corporation. Those are the two kind of standards for liability protection and asset protection. Now there's a few other things depending on the states that you're in. Some states, like Wyoming, you can set up a certain type of trust. There's ways that you can use trusts for protection and other types of things. But the most common would be an LLC or a corporation.
So let's dig into the LLC first. What does that look like?
So most of the time, an LLC it's called a limited liability company. And it's exactly what it was actually invented in Wyoming. Little known fact, Wyoming invented the LLC, and then other states started catching on and thinking, oh, this is a good idea. It's less, there's less requirements than you have in a corporation. Typically, they're simpler, easier to run, more flexible than a corporation. They're really good for family-run businesses, for smaller operations, for small businesses. Because of the flexibility you can have in an LLC, you can really design the LLC to do pretty much any kind of legal business you want to have. As long as you're following the standard protocols for running that business, the very standard best practices for a business, then you can maintain that liability protection. I love LLCs. I set them up every day. In fact, before we got on this interview and this podcast, I was talking to another new client that we've got, and we're setting up another LLC for somebody. So I just do this all the time because they're so easy and functional. They're really my favorite type of entity when it comes to small businesses. There's just a lot of flexibility.
You had mentioned the botulism case. Now that's kind of an extreme one. So maybe we could do something where maybe someone just gets sick. Like, we're not talking about death, okay? But what would that look like now? So you have an LLC. You had mentioned in the sole proprietor, like all of your personal assets are potentially at risk. So how does that differ now that you have an LLC?
All right. So, I can use some examples from just even our own,
sure.
Our own operation. Yeah. So, one of the things that we do is we hay our pasture, and my husband also cuts hay for a few other pastures. He does some custom hay cutting, and then we lease a couple of hay pastures that we cut for our own hay. So was something that just happened and kind of came up here not too long ago, actually this summer. My husband sold some hay to some guy. We didn't know him. It's just a random guy that, found his ad on Craigslist and came and picked up some hay. And about a month later, we get a phone call from this guy. It says, "Oh, that hay's all moldy." Well, did you cover it? Did you, like, we don't know what he did with the hay. Is it even our hay? He only bought 40 bales. He says, "Well, my donkey or mule, I can't remember which one it was, is sick." So my husband's very concerned about animals, wants to make sure we take care of them. So my husband had our vet scheduled to go out there and check out their mule to make sure that it was okay. Well, the guy never actually had our vet come out. So was the mule really sick? The hay we got back, we are convinced it wasn't our hay. It didn't even look like our hay. I mean, it just was very suspicious. You just don't know. And it could have been maybe he left it outside and it got rained on a bunch, and we just don't know, right? But that was an instance that we had. That was one of his prize mules. If that mule had gotten sick and died, and for real, then my husband, he gave the guy his money back on his hay and just said, call us if something changes on the mule. Never heard back from the guy. So did he just want his money back? Is this something that he does normally? You don't really know on some of these things, but that's a liability that we potentially faced. Possibly a sick or a dead mule. But your bigger risks are really more of not running your operation correctly, not dotting your I's, crossing your T's, and not protecting what we call the corporate veil. That's the legal terminology for protecting that liability. The way I like to explain it is when you have an LLC or a corporation, either one, it's like you're building a brick wall around your business, and everything inside that brick wall is protected. That brick wall, it's all your business, all that is protected. Everything outside is also protected, right? That brick wall should be an impenetrable wall to protect from liability exposure from your personal, which is the outside the wall, or the business, which is inside. So because you also want to protect that, you want that protection to go both ways. The more common likelihood is somebody gets in a car accident. We see that. Somebody gets in a car accident and somebody sues. My parents got rear-ended, and the person who rear-ended them is suing them. It wasn't my dad's fault. It wasn't my parents' fault. But people just want the insurance money, so they're suing. If you have that wall in place, that liability wall, that works both ways. So that person who's suing from that car accident, you don't want them to be able to reach into the business and take the business assets. If you have people that come and work on your place, if they're pulling weeds, if they're harvesting, if they're helping with the animals, and one of them gets hurt, that's going to be more likely the kind of liability you're going to face. Are you in compliance with all the employment laws? Do you have all the right things in place? For somebody that has a business that's maybe adjacent to or related to, like you create content for your homestead. You've got your YouTube channel, you have all of that. Are you protecting those assets? That's an intellectual property asset. Somebody could take that and steal that. So there's a liability around somebody taking your creation, your content, copying it, reproducing it somewhere else online. That's a liability. So liability can be all kinds of things that you don't think about. The liability, it can be really anything that could harm your business or could cause you stress and frustration. That's a liability. If it keeps you up at night, it's a liability. If it stresses you up, if it stresses you out and you're not sleeping about it, then what can you do to fix it? What can we do to maybe create, a wall that might help protect from that?
So in the case where you sold the hay, let's say the donkey or the mule suffered, needed vet care, and the guy wanted to sue for the cost of that vet care plus,
Mhm.
damages, whatever. Because you have the LLC in place, you had mentioned with the sole proprietorship, your house, your car, whatever is all potentially at risk. The LLC, does it protect um does it protect your personal assets from like this guy if he's trying to
Yeah.
sue for that? Like he can only go after your business, right? Versus
Yes. Yeah.
okay.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. That's the general idea behind an LLC or a corporation is you're protecting your personal assets from exposure. So that's the whole idea.
Now you had mentioned the corporate veil, and kind
Mhm.
of the other side of that same coin is piercing the corporate veil, right? What
Yeah.
does that mean? And how does that
So,
happen?
so think about it this way. There's best practices around a business. And I will say, in my experience working with small businesses, which I do every day, um, most small businesses are not doing everything they should to make sure that that corporate veil is being pierced. They're not doing all the things they need to do, best practices, right? And there's every state, I mean, there's some general lists that are general law around the country that apply in almost every state, but every state even has some that are a little bit slightly tweaked because of different court cases or different things that have happened in the state. But most generally, the biggest things to do are you commingling funds?
Hmm.
So if you're running an LLC or a corporation and you're commingling that business funds with your personal funds or with another entity's funds, if there's any commingle, then that is probably the number one biggest problem you've just created. All that brick wall that we build when we put an LLC together or a corporation, that's like putting a bomb on your brick wall and destroying it right there. That is like you're just opening the floodgates for liability exposure, both to your business and personally. Because remember, that goes both ways. So commingling funds, one of the biggest no-nos we see. And it happens more often than you think. So the things that we find the most common is you've got a business credit card or a business debit card in your wallet. You go to the grocery store. Oh shoot, I forgot my personal debit card. And you use the business card to buy groceries.
Mm.
I would say almost every business owner has done it. It's just because it happens. Okay, well, that happens. Sometimes you just are an emergency. You forgot your other card, so you have to do it. All right, document it. Reimburse the company. Give the receipt with an explanation on the receipt that you're reimbursing for that. Document it. If you don't, you just created a liability. You're pulling bricks out. You're just every time you do something, you're just pulling bricks off that brick wall.
Yeah. So confession, that happened to me once. I was at the grocery store and I forgot my wallet.
Yep.
So the only thing I had was my business checkbook in my truck.
Mm-hmm.
So I did it, but then when that transaction came through, I used QuickBooks to do my bookkeeping.
Mm-hmm.
I can put in the ledger, this is what happened, and then I can exclude the transaction from being considered a business expense as far as my taxes go.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's that notation in there. So, and of course, like you said, the receipts in there as well. So I've actually done that, but
Yeah.
yeah,
But it
I'm trying to,
happens. It
yeah,
happens.
it does, but you got to
And
be above board about it.
yeah, you just have to be above board about it, and don't do it every week you go grocery shopping. That's what gets you into trouble, right? If you have do that on accident, it happens. You reimburse, you make a note of it, you put it in your accounts. You make sure that your CPA doesn't include that as a business expense. You do all those things, right? Where you get into trouble is when, and this is where we see the trouble happen, is when people are just using it as like a money tree, right? Oh, there's money in the business account. Oh, I'm going to go buy that couch that I want, or I'm going to go, I'm going to go pay for my kids, dentist appointment or the orthodontist this month, or you just where you're using it as like just like a money machine, right? And you're using it for all your personal expenses. That's where you get into trouble. Or if you have all of your money in the same bank account, if you've got the business money and your personal money going into the same account, there's no separation. You just, like I said, it just blew up that wall right there. Commingling funds is the number one thing that we see that gets people into trouble. The second thing that I see, and we do business litigation. I have a whole litigation team of attorneys in my office. It's not, our law firm isn't just me, right? My job is to hire people who are amazing at what they do and bring them in and let them help our clients and, just do the best that they do, right? So our business litigation team, and I've done business litigation too. We've done all kinds of stuff. And I've learned the most about liability for businesses through representing businesses in litigation, going through that process, because you see all the holes. And let me tell you, the other side is going to expose every hole they can find because they want to remove some of that liability protection. So the second thing that I see is the biggest problem that I've dealt with. And other attorneys might have other things that they say are their number one or number two, but is not documenting your company properly, not having the proper operating agreement in place, not documenting business decisions, not documenting authorizations. One of the most common things that we see in family-owned businesses is, oh, we're just family.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to put that in writing because we're just family. Biggest mistake ever. And it doesn't matter if it's between husband and wife, kids coming into the business, cousins, aunts and uncles. I mean, some of the messiest litigation that I've ever seen is in family-run businesses, because somebody starts feeling like they're doing more work than somebody else, or the ownership isn't documented properly. That is super common. That happens all the time. Or if there's a death or a divorce or a horrible accident, someone's disabled, they can't do the business anymore. I kind of joke with people and I tell people, but this is the truth. I mean, I don't have the statistic in front of me, but I think it's a huge, huge amount. The number one thing that kills a family business is either death, disability, or divorce.
The
Those
3Ds.
The 3Ds, and they are a small business's worst enemy.
Yeah.
So not documenting your company, and it can be simple as, oh, I bought this tractor, or we had to buy this truck or this four-wheeler, and you're spending money out of the business account for these things, and there's no documentation authorizing it. And then a partner or another person, another owner in the company comes in and says, wait a minute, I don't like that decision. Now we're in a fight about something else. I know you didn't document it. That was an unauthorized transaction. I'm going to use that against you. You're pulling bricks out of that wall of protection every time you don't document things.
I think a lot of people can just be like, I don't want to deal with all this. I'll just do sole proprietorship and take my chances. But until you start really hearing about what that risk means, and really, like, it's probably just a couple phone calls to you, or an attorney like you, and just get it taken care of up front, and you're set. So that's why I wanted to stress that. But we've covered 3 of 4 of the entities. The last one I think you said was corporation. Can you kind of tell us about that and how that's different from an LLC?
So corporation has similar liability protections like an LLC. The corporation was the first entity really created that gave that kind of liability protection, and there's a really solid structures. It's a good business structure. A corporation, though, requires having a board of directors, officers. There's a lot more paperwork. There's a lot more management that needs to happen with a corporation. The paperwork is just more. Everything is just more when you deal with a corporation. Now, sometimes that's a good idea to have. sometimes a corporation is exactly the right entity you want, because maybe you have a multi-generational homestead or farm or ranch operation where you've got, different generations of family members that are working, and the different family members are on the board and they have votes in proportion with their ownership interest in the corporation. You may have set up a corporation for a succession plan purpose. That happens. We do that sometimes, where we'll set the business structure up for the ranch or the farm or the homestead, simply because the family is looking down the road at succession planning and what that's going to mean for the next generation and the next generation after that, and how that gets passed along. There's different reasons for that, but in its most basic, a corporation typically will have a board of directors. It has stocks or shares. Every owner is a shareholder or a stockholder, and they own that number of shares. Sometimes the shares are 100, sometimes it's 1,000, sometimes it's 10,000, it's 1,000,000. You can really have any number of shares you want. Those shares are valued annually based on the value of the company. There are typically a president, vice president, treasurer. Sometimes companies will come in and call them CEOs, CFOs, COOs. There's all kinds of different ways that you can do that. And each state has its own Corporations Act, which is the statutes and laws that govern how a corporation needs to run. And if you have a corporation, you need to make sure that your attorney gives you best practices, tells you what you need to do to make sure you're complying with all of those laws. We talk about that brick wall around an LLC, all those best practices. Same thing with a corporation. You've got to do all the legal requirements to make sure you are protecting that company from liability, and then vice versa, protecting yourself. One thing though, I would mention there, though, we're talking about a lot of liability, and we're talking about how do we protect from that. One thing we haven't talked about is insurance. And I think that gets lost sometimes in the conversation when you're thinking about, okay, if I'm going to set up an LLC, I've got protection from liability. Well, it doesn't mean somebody's still not going to try to sue you for some reason or another, or, like our case of the hay and the mule, we have insurance. So even if that mule had gotten sick and died, we have insurance that would have covered it. And within that liability protection, so there's a lot of different layers of liability protection you want to have. You don't want just to have the LLC or the corporation by itself. You want to have insurance, and you want to make sure you have the right contracts in place, and you want to make sure you've got, all of these other documents that can help along the way. It's not one thing that gives you liability protection. It's many things all on top of each other.
I'm going to try and summarize this really quick. So you have the sole proprietorship, which you say in most cases that's just not a good idea for most people. We have the LLC and then the corporation. And the LLC sounds like it's almost a blending of the two, where you don't have to deal with having all the officers and the shareholders and all that. You still get the protection of the corporation, but the simplicity of the sole proprietorship. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to say it. An LLC just gives you a lot more flexibility, where in a corporation, you don't have the flexibility. Corporations are a lot more strict, a lot more controls put in place. Whereas an LLC, you can run it like a corporation if you want to. You can have a board if you want to, or you can run it similar to a sole proprietor, where you've got one person just making all the decisions, and it's very, 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 very simple. I mean, an LLC is so great because it can really function in any way you really need it to.
It's just the lowest hanging fruit that still gets you the protection you need. So
that's a really great way to describe it. That's the low hanging fruit, and it's so easy to do. I guess that's the thing. A lot of people get intimidated by, well, I'm just doing this. I'm just selling hay, and I'm only selling a little bit. I mean, we don't make a living off of our place at all. We had some extra hay, and so we were going to just sell it because we didn't need it. we're not doing it to make a living, but do you want to have that extra, just little bit of protection? It's just a little bit, and that little bit just gives you a little more peace of mind. Doesn't cost a lot to do either. I think the other thing that people are afraid of is the cost of setting up an LLC and then the paperwork to run it. It's not hard. I mean, we even set it up so simple because like in our firm, we've seen it where people don't do things right on the paperwork side. We've even set up a business maintenance subscription where people just pay us monthly and we just take care of all the paperwork so they don't have to. And it's cheap. I mean, for most LLCs, I think we're charging, I have to double check what we're charging on that. But I think we're charging $50 a month. I mean, it's really cheap and we take care of the paperwork. Well, there you go. I don't have to worry about it.
That's a lot less than an internet bill or.
Right.
There's a ton more we can talk about here, but we're getting short on time. So I definitely wanted to circle back around to a couple things here. One, if people are listening to this and they're interested in talking to you or an attorney that you're affiliated with in their state, how do they go about getting in touch with you and getting that set up to where they can learn more about an LLC or a corporation, depending on what's right for them?
So you can call our firm at 970-776-3311, or you can email us, or you can go to our website, even through our website, and maybe maybe Dan, we could set up the information at the bottom of the screen.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll put it down in the video description below the videos where it'll have links and everything to get right there. And lastly, I'm very, very affiliated with Abundance Plus, as you know. And for those who don't know what that is, that's Justin Rhodes' homesteading streaming platform that he started last year. And Crystal is joining that family with producing exclusive content for that. Can you tell us just real quick a little bit about what that's going to look like?
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. We started shooting videos, which is a little outside of my comfort zone because I'm a lawyer. I'm not a content creator, but I'm excited. We're doing a whole series on just the business side of homesteading and farming and ranching, so that and we're going to cover all of the issues. We're going to cover the things we talked about today, but we're going to cover a whole host of things we haven't even gotten into. I mean, there's so much to cover when it goes into the business side. And then we're going to do another whole series just on succession planning. So succession planning is it's way more than just having a will or a trust set up for your family. Succession planning is essentially looking at the legacy that you're building, and then how are you passing that legacy on? What does that look like? And that includes a lot of things besides just a trust or a will. So I'll go into a lot of detail. We'll have a series on that. We're going to have a series on intellectual property, because so many people these days have a YouTube channel. They have some sort of content that they're creating. Maybe they're posting stuff on Facebook, or they're doing stuff on Instagram. Maybe you have created a product that you're selling. If you have a unique soap product that you're making, or cheese, or maybe you came up with this great name for your operation and you don't want anyone else to steal it. Those are just simple things, right? We're going to have a whole series just on intellectual property and how to protect that. How do you protect the things that you're creating? Do you sell herbs? Do you sell feeder pigs? What are there things that you need to protect there? And then we're going to have another series on property rights, because I can't tell you how many fence line disputes that I have dealt with. Mm-hmm. I've been doing business coaching for a long time. On this is another business that I have besides practicing law. So we're going to be offering exclusive packages to Abundance Plus members. So if they have legal needs and they want to hire our firm to help them, we're going to have exclusive legal packages, flat fee pricing. So everybody, what you're getting, what you're paying for up front. There's no guessing, it's not an open checkbook. And then I'm also going to be offering exclusive business coaching packages through Abundance Plus for people who just want that extra help on how to run and manage their business, aside from the legal. This is more of just really and truly, how do I do this? I've been I've owned and operated businesses for a long time. And when I went to law school, it was just another business for me to have, another business for me to run. And so I'm excited. I'm really excited to be partnering with Abundance Plus and working with Dan and some of the others.
Yeah, and we're truly blessed to have you. Like the amount of value you're bringing to this community, to the members is huge. So thank you very much for that. And I'll also leave a link in the description for Abundance Plus down below. I think we're shooting it for early October release on that. It's late September right now as we're filming this. So really soon that'll be out. And we look forward
Mhm.
to that and more conversations with you in the future.
Yeah, always happy to come back.
All right. Thanks so much, Crystal. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Dan.